Hey everyone, and welcome to Pagan Happy Hour and happy Ostara and spring equinox. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. We will be discussing the pagan holiday, which is called many things. Some people call it Ostara, some people call it the equinox. And we'll be going over different ways that you can celebrate this pagan holiday. I'm going to be focusing in on some cheap and free ways to celebrate because you don't always need to spend money to have a great pagan holiday. And before we get into that, though, we'll also be discussing a bit about this holiday and its history and the goddess that is most often associated with this holiday. So that is what is in store for today. And if you are new here, welcome. I do Pagan Happy Hour every Friday at 5 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Eastern. And it's really just kind of like a great way for us pagans and witches to connect with each other, to share ideas, to share thoughts, to have a discussion. And I will be looking over here as we go along. I am going to be bringing in your thoughts and your ideas into the conversation as much as possible. So please do share all of your ideas and thoughts in the chat box. And there are two ways that you can support Pagan Happy Hour and my channel if you want to. The first way is through my Patreon, which I have linked down below in my description box. And if you do choose to join my Patreon, you also gain access to my exclusive Discord community, which is a great way to chat and share resources with fellow pagans. And the other way you can support the show is through super chats, which is the $ button at the bottom of the chat box. And by clicking on that, you can donate any amount and your comment or question will pop up really big for me. So I'll be sure to bring in your thoughts and your ideas and your comments into the conversation. Now that we got that out of the way, I would love for you all in the comments to tell me where you are watching from today and what you happen to be drinking. So let me cue that drink music. And I'm just having a lovely white wine. I am located here in the beautiful city of Savannah, but let's see where you all are tuning in from. Okay, looks like we have people from Denver, from Indiana, Arlington, Arizona, Virginia, England, Pennsylvania, Serbia, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas City, let's see, Michigan, California, we have Japan, we have Northern Ireland, we have Georgia, we have Ohio, Wisconsin, West Virginia, Poland, let's see, San Francisco, Minnesota, Michigan, Oregon, Seattle, Belgium, and Canada. Thank you guys so much for sharing. It is so wonderful to see so many of you all tuning in to celebrate this ancient pagan holiday. And how old is it? And where does all of this come from? That is what we are going to be getting into first. Now, if you are new to my channel, you might not be aware, but I've covered a lot of Ostara content in previous years. So after Pagan Happy Hour is over, I have some links down below in the description if you want to continue to watch more videos and learn more about this holiday. But let's jump right in. I'll turn off that drink music. I'll have a sip of my wine and we will get started. So, what is the spring equinox? We call it Ostara, some people do, but pretty much everyone also knows it as the spring equinox. So, when you look at it on the wheel of the year, the equinox falls at a time when daylight and nighttime are equal. So, it is this kind of balanced moment within the wheel of the year. Same thing with the autumn equinox, where also light and dark are balanced. But the spring equinox is so much more than that because it really marks the beginning of spring. Now, most secular people who know nothing about paganism consider the spring equinox to be the first official day of spring. And it might differ on if you go by that or not based on your climate. I definitely used to go by that date back when I lived in Chicago because I really didn't feel much of that spring energy until the equinox. But nowadays that I live in Georgia, I kind of think spring starts a little bit earlier than the equinox, probably around March 1st or so. So it is up to you in terms of where you kind of mentally fit your location in with the start of spring. If you want to use the date of the equinox, you are more than welcome to. But if you kind of want to pick a different date based on your climate, that's fine too. Now, the equinox is a little bit interesting because we don't really know much about how the ancient pagans celebrated both the spring equinox and the autumn equinox. If you're looking at the wheel of the year, like the Wiccan wheel of the year, that is a combination of different holidays. You have the four traditional Irish Gaelic festivals, and then you combine that with the two solstices and the two equinoxes. But the problem is, we barely know anything about how these equinoxes were celebrated, other than the fact that we think they were for sure celebrated. But especially when you're looking at things from the Celtic pagan world, they didn't write a lot down. So we only have secondhand accounts, mostly from Christians who came later on. And we have very little to go on, other than the fact that we do know some of these stone circles were based in alignment with the equinox, which is one indicator that these dates were considered important to them. But other than that, it's a bit of a blank slate, which can be intimidating, I think, to kind of figure out how we as modern pagans celebrate this holiday. But it can also be fun. Now, we do know a bit about the spring equinox. Not all information is lost, luckily. So we will be getting into that. Now, the date of the spring equinox does vary each year because it's the specific date where daytime and nighttime is equal. So it kind of varies between the 20th and the 22nd of March. This year, it's falling on March 20th, I believe, which is in a couple days. So even though we are celebrating Ostara today here on Pagan Happy Hour, the actual date that you would probably be celebrating is on Sunday, the 20th. Of course, keep in mind that if you are in the southern hemisphere, it's switched. So if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're probably not celebrating the spring equinox, you're celebrating the autumn equinox. Since paganism is so much about our bioregionality and the seasonality in the wheel of the year, in my view, it makes most sense to go with the wheel of the year system that best fits your own climate where you live. But let me see here. Let me have another sip. So we do know that Ostara, the holiday, does predate Easter. In fact, the term Easter comes from the word Ostara. So the Christians chose this time to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus because people were already celebrating around this time of year. Now, you might have wondered about Easter before because there is quite a lot of crossover here between the pagan Ostara and the Christian Easter. Obviously, you see all these images of bunnies and eggs associated with Christian Easter. That doesn't make a lot of sense for Christians. We'll be getting into the symbolism aspect in a second. But I just wanted to mention that one of the unique things about Easter as a Christian holiday is it's actually based on a lunar, kind of a more pagan calendar, which determines the date of Easter. That's why the date of Easter is so variable each year. I believe how it works is that it is on the Sunday after the first full moon that occurs after the spring equinox. So we have the spring equinox, then you have to wait for the first full moon. And then after that, that following Sunday, that is Easter. So already that's quite interesting. It kind of almost creates this fusion between Christian Easter and pagan Ostara, that they are choosing the date of Easter so much based on kind of a equinox date and a moon point or when the moon is full. So that's kind of just a neat little tidbit if you were wondering why the date of Easter is always changing. Now, we do know about Ostara and this holiday that existed before Christian Easter. It is possible that there was an actual goddess, and this would be a Germanic goddess. Her name is kind of like Aoster, but nowadays people call it like Ostara or Aostra. There's a lot of different ways to pronounce her name. But she is a Germanic goddess of spring and the dawn. So a lot of people think this holiday of the equinox was in part a way to honor her, this particular goddess, and of course, also to honor the start of spring. Even if you don't follow a Germanic pagan path or a heathen path or even a Celtic path, there are cultures all around the world that have had pagan celebrations to honor spring. So whether Aostra existed as an actual goddess or not doesn't matter too much, because the main thing here is that there is a universality to this holiday in general. People from all over the world have been honoring the equinox as a point where the seasons change, where you enter into this springtime and that stress of the winter and, oh my God, am I going to have enough food? That falls away and you get excited and revived and you feel that sunshine on your skin and you are ready to start the growing season. And that is really kind of universal theme to spring celebrations across the world as a whole. But let me check your comments here. Let me know what you guys have to say about this so far. Oh, Leah in the comments has a good point. She says, the Jewish holiday of Passover is celebrated on the full moon after the spring equinox, which is when Jesus and his apostles were celebrating. Yeah, so this kind of idea of using the lunar calendar to mark certain big events within the Abrahamic faith is something not just true to Christianity, but Judaism as well. Let's see. Oh, okay. Interesting comment here. And I'm not sure on this one, but this might be true. That says the Celts and Germanic people actually celebrated on the full moon and not the actual equinox, and that the celebration of the equinox is more of a ancient Roman thing. Great comment. I'm going to have to look into that because that sounds interesting. Let's see. What else do we have here? In the comments, someone's mentioning that the Aztec New Year has a contested date, but it's likely on the spring equinox. So that could be very cool. Let's see. Oh, we have our first super chat from Daka. Thank you very much. Cheers. That says, listing some Slavic traditions associated with the equinox, such as waiting for the swallows and the storks. Let's see, creating a straw doll of Morana. I believe she's a goddess of spring. Let's see, and certain mask parades, cleaning and feasting. Yeah, there are so many peoples all over the world that celebrate this time of the equinox or right around the equinox, that it does kind of indicate that this holiday is so much more than just the goddess Eostra or the Wiccan holiday of Ostara, it really transcends borders. It's celebrated everywhere in just kind of different ways. Let's see, what else do we have? Um, okay, so let me briefly talk a bit about Eostra, the goddess. So I mentioned that it's possible she existed. She is pretty much only mentioned in the writings of an 8th century monk when he was visiting Northumbria. So this is in he was an Anglo-Saxon, and this is like pretty early on, right? 8th century, right? He knew that in Northumbria they held festivals dedicated to her, and around this time of the year. But other than this specific text written by a monk in the 8th century, we don't really have any written information about Eostra as a goddess of spring and the dawn. So we kind of have to either take his word for it that people were celebrating her, um, and we just really don't know. But what's interesting here is Aostra becomes a much bigger deal later on, especially in German history. So Germany has always kind of had this weird obsession with trying to kind of create their own mythology. You can look at Wagner as a good example of this. And Aostra was kind of um, taken as this goddess to represent this Germanic spirit in the 19th century. So, in the 19th century, a whole lot of poetry and artwork was all about celebrating this Germanic spring goddess. So, she became much more popular after the 18th century than possibly she ever was as an actual pagan goddess, which is kind of weird and unusual, right? But it makes sense in a kind of study of the German obsession with trying to create their own mythology. Um, so I wanted to mention that we don't know really anything about her or how she was celebrated during these spring equinox festivals, other than it's possible that she was this important goddess to the Germanic peoples. Question. Let's see. In the comments, is that Beatty? I believe so. That was the monk, the name of the monk that wrote this down. And then I see in the comments, Alva has a good point here about looking at the linguistics. So the month of kind of like, I guess it's the month of April, actually. It's the month of April or March that in Old English came from the term Eostra or Ostara. It looks like in High German it was Ostara month. So Ostara month. So yeah, you can look at the linguistics here to get some kind of further indications on how this transition occurred from this Germanic goddess, Eostra, to the pagan holiday of Ostara, to Easter, all of which is very similar. If you've ever read Neil Gaiman's American Gods or seen the TV show they made based on that book, one of the characters, her name is Easter, and she is basically Eostra in the show. And I love that they incorporated her and kind of went into how there's all this kind of bizarre connections between Ostara and Easter. So yeah, definitely look into that TV show or the book if you are into kind of a contemporary modern interpretation on pagan deities. So let's see. Now, there are other goddesses that are associated with the spring other than Eostra, right? There are many pantheons out there. Another popular goddess that is associated with the equinox in this time of year is Eodun, who is a Scandinavian goddess. She is associated with the apples of immortality. So, one of the neat things about the Norse gods is they're only kind of immortal, which makes them quite a bit different than like the Greco-Roman gods. Of course, we know Ragnarok and many of the Norse gods die, but also their immortality or their youth had to be maintained by eating these apples. And Iadun was the goddess in charge of these magic apples that gave the gods their immortality. So she is also a goddess that has been referenced in connection to this ancient pagan holiday. Oh, and I have a super chat from, let's see, Spiritual Boy. Cheers. That says, thanks for helping me find my path as an eclectic pagan. Awesome. I'm an eclectic pagan too. So that's great. Thank you so much for the support. Let's see. I see a question here in the comments from Joey that says, I wonder if rabbits and eggs are associated with Ostara. Excellent question. And that's going to transition us into this next section, talking about symbolism here. Because when it comes to Easter, right, we've all grown up, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have grown up in a Christian centric society where the celebration of Easter is kind of a conundrum, right? You have this kind of resurrection of Christ motif in a religious context, but you are honoring it with symbols such as eggs and the Easter bunny. So, eggs and bunnies, what does that have to do with Jesus? Um, Basically nothing. It doesn't really have much to do with Jesus, but it does have a lot to do with the ancient pagan festivals associated with the equinox and the early spring. So eggs, let's start with that. Eggs obviously are really important. Anyone who has chickens, I don't have any chickens themselves, though I might get some in the future, knows that chickens will often stop laying eggs in the cold winter, or they'll slow down their egg production. And then when it's spring, they will pick that back up. So they will start laying again. So the egg idea, the spring has arrived, the chickens are now laying, we now have a great protein source. This would have obviously been very important to the pagans and really anyone back in the day who was worried about making it through the winter. Now, there's all these traditions of dyeing eggs or decorating eggs. And I actually did a video vlog a couple weeks ago where I showed you how I like to dye my own eggs. I use natural dyes from plant material, trying to kind of stay within that pagan mindset of using what we have naturally around us. And why do we dye eggs? It's a good question. There are some theories out there. I think in general, the dyeing of the eggs is meant to mimic the spring blooms that are arriving and or about to arrive. We're finally starting to see these spring colors in our gardens, in the natural world. So we are celebrating that by dyeing these eggs or decorating these eggs. So that explains the egg aspect. Now let me get into the bunny aspect. So bunnies and the Easter bunny, we all know, is a symbol associated with this time of year. So spring, and you've probably heard of spring fever. There are a lot of people who are excited to be out of the winter zone and to connect physically with others in spring season. And we all know that bunnies in particular get very busy. They like to have a lot of babies and they really are enjoying the springtime, right? So, bunnies and associated them with this time of year is kind of a celebration of life. It's a celebration of procreation. It's a celebration of the physical aspect of procreation. I don't want to go too much into that. I don't want to get demonetized. as is the next holiday of Beltane, too. But I think we've all experienced this, especially when you're younger, when you're a teenager, when it's spring and you're out and about and you just kind of feel all of that energy that the spring provides. So that's where the bunnies come in, which makes it extra weird that bunnies are the symbol of Easter, which is, a very religious holiday, right? And, kids go and sit on the Easter bunny's lap, and it's like, don't you realize that this is just a fertility symbol? It's kind of weird. Um, but for us pagans, it makes a lot of sense to decorate with bunnies and eggs because we are all about celebrating the virility and the fertility of the natural world, both within the plants, within the animal world, and within the human world. We don't have like shame towards that in the same way that Christians might. So that's where the whole bunny symbolism comes from, if you were curious. But let me see what you guys have to say about that. Okay. Let's see. Interesting comment that says rabbits provide food for a lot of other animals in the food web. They are aware of this, which is why they reproduce so much. That's true. When you think about kind of the wider web of life, a lot of things eat bunnies, so they have to make lots of babies. Let's see. Oh, great comment here from Kristen Louise that says in Judaism, a hard boiled egg is placed on the cedar plate. Its roundness alludes to the cycle of rebirth, and the cracked shell serves as a reminder of the ancient sacrificial offerings. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. But that makes a lot of sense too when you think about the egg being round, being circular, this whole kind of wheel of the year aspect, and the concept of life, death, and rebirth. Awesome. Let me see what else you guys have to say. Okay. Oh, and we have a super chat from One Cruise Bat. Thank you very much. Cheers. Okay, awesome. So we talked a little bit about Ostara, the equinox, the history, the goddesses associated with spring. Oh, I forgot to mention Persephone. Can't forget to mention Persephone from the Greek pantheon, but I'm sure you're probably already aware of her anyway. And now we should probably dive in a bit to ways that you can celebrate Ostara. There are so many fun and easy things you can do to honor this pagan holiday. And I should probably mention when it comes to pagan holidays in particular, while yes, the 20th is going to be the exact date to celebrate Ostara, I kind of think of pagan holidays more as a season or like a chunk of 2 or 3 weeks or so. And so if you can't celebrate on the actual equinox, I think that's fine. You can kind of think of this more as the Ostara time within the wheel of the year or Ostara season or equinox season. So don't feel pressure that you have to do a bunch of stuff on the actual date. I think of it as kind of more of a gradual thing that you can really start celebrating Ostara a couple weeks ago and continue it a couple weeks after until we start to transition into Beltane season, which is one of my personal favorites. So we're going to jump into that. And I see in the comments, thank you, Rachel, for the super chat. I really appreciate the support. I'm glad you are enjoying the show today. So let's talk about some ideas. There are so many fun ways to celebrate. Now, the first thing that I've already mentioned is dyeing eggs. This is probably something you did as a child if you grew up in America, or at least I did. dye eggs every year as a child, and I really enjoyed it. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to offer that content this year on how to dye with natural dyes instead of those kind of weird artificial tablets or food coloring, which is kind of a lot of chemicals. But there are plenty of different ways you can dye eggs. You don't also have to dye them. You can also just draw pagan symbols on them. You can paint them. In Slavic cultures, they have such a huge tradition of painting eggs, and they use a different method. Usually in America, when we dye eggs, we hard boil them. And then we dye them, and then I put them back in the fridge and I eat them periodically throughout the week as a tasty snack. But if you want them to last, what you can do is you poke two holes, one hole in the top and one hole in the bottom with a knitting needle. And then you stick the knitting needle in there and kind of swirl it around to kind of break up the yolk. And then you hold the egg and you blow through one of the holes so that the egg kind of comes out the other side. Now the egg is outside of the shell so that the shell will fully dry, and you can preserve it throughout the years. So that's a great technique if you're really wanting to get into your egg decorations and create beautiful designs that you want to last more than one season. Let's see. Now, probably one of the other easiest and fun ways to celebrate Ostara is to just plant some seeds. After all, this time of year, we are celebrating the beginning of spring. We're celebrating the renewal of the earth and all of that spring energy. So planting is really a wonderful way to celebrate. I myself have been doing a ton of garden work the past few weeks, and I will continue to do so. Those of you who have been following me for a while know that I recently moved into a house, so I actually have a little bit of garden space, and I've been really getting into it. I got about 10 tomato plants out there. I got pepper plants. I got a ton of stuff growing and some witchy herbs too. So it can be a great time of year to plant, of course, depending on your climate. So some of you might just be seed starting indoors at this point, while some of you might be able to directly plant outdoors depending on what zone you are in. I recommend checking out your garden zone, and you can easily do that just online. Let's see. Oh, another super chat here from Carrie that says, I love starting seeds inside at this time of year, and that the process is always magical to me. Yes, I have started seeds indoors usually, especially when I lived in Chicago. And even when I lived in Dallas, I actually started seeds indoors because I got impatient. And you don't have to feel limited, even if you don't have space outdoors. I have done quite a lot on just a tiny balcony or even in a windowsill. If you follow me back to last year, I lived in Dallas and I had a little balcony and I grew a lot of stuff on that tiny space. And I had a great time planting seeds during Ostara for that process. So there are so many ways that you can get into planting. Even if you live in an urban environment, often you'll find community gardens in your area. Not in every city, not in every neighborhood, but I would recommend looking that up if you don't have any garden space in your apartment, for example. Usually they are in a kind of like a lottery system community garden, so you can put your name in and maybe get picked, or you can ask, and see if they have any space available for you to plant, or you can do my favorite type of planting, which is guerrilla gardening, where you can just kind of plant wherever and hope the city doesn't notice. I've done that before too. So a lot of opportunities here to really celebrate this spring energy through growing something. And it doesn't have to be, vegetables. It could be flowers too, whatever will bring you the most joy. I say go for it. So let me see here. It looks like a lot of you all use the Ostara season as a great opportunity to connect with planting. Let's see. Drakar in the comments says, I'm starting so many seeds this year, and that my partner and I made it a joint activity and they just started sprouting. Yes, I get so much joy from watching seeds sprout. It is insane. I know people say that gardening is like therapy and it's really good for your mental health, and I feel it. I really do. Let's see. Okay, what else do we have here? Just checking your comments. Uhtred in the comments says, I do guerrilla harvesting. There are fruits and herbs all over public land. Yeah, if you're lucky enough to live somewhere where you might find some fruits and herbs, a lot of medicinal herbs like red clover, for example, you can just kind of find everywhere, or even like dandelion or plantain. So that's, just a really simple and fun and easy thing you can do is just plant some seeds. Seed packets, cost a couple dollars, and it's a great way to honor this season. Let's see. Mary has a super chat. Thank you very much. She says, I love planting seeds and I'm starting some in an eggshell. That's wonderful. And that's kind of a great way to kind of combine two of these days or two of these things. You're using the egg symbolism of Ostara and you're using that eggshell as your planting vessel. So that's awesome. I love that. Let's see, what else do we have? Okay, so some other ideas here is to pick some wildflowers. There are most likely some flowers blooming where you live, depending on your climate, of course. In early spring, you might find crocuses, you might find daffodils, you might find tulips, and you might just find a variety of different wildflowers. So picking flowers and putting them on your altar at this time of year is a wonderful way to celebrate, or it doesn't even have to be on your altar, just anywhere in your home. And you can use this walk where you're trying to find any wildflowers to take home with you as a great opportunity to notice these subtle changes of spring. I remember this was a really big thing for me when I lived in Chicago, and it was so cold and miserable for so many months that I would go on my daily walk and I would be like looking at the ground obsessively, just waiting for the first signs of spring, for those snowdrops, for those daffodils, for those tulips, for those hyacinths, whatever I could see. And even if I wasn't picking it, because it might have belonged to a neighbor, for example, it still brought me so much joy just watching these plants emerge from the snow. And now here in Savannah, I don't have as much of a winter, but I've still been really enjoying noticing here specifically the azaleas bloom, which they do in early March, and it really kind of marks that start of spring. So ask yourself in your own area, what plant or what flower do you notice first? What natural flower, herb, whatever it is, what to you marks that beginning of spring? For me in Chicago, it was those snowdrops, but here in Savannah, it's the azaleas. So it's kind of different depending on where you live. I'd be curious to see what flower or plant you choose as kind of that initial marker that kind of makes you feel all of those cozy spring vibes. Let's see what you guys have to say. Okay. I see Ari in the comments says chives being what they represent as the beginning. Let's see. I see some more Comments about crocuses and daffodils. Let's see. Leah says, green grass thriving and not covered in snow is a good start. Yes, even simple grass can be a good indicator of spring. Drakara mentions the local birds, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up as a great activity for Ostara is to go on a bird watching walk. Just a walk around your neighborhood where you're actually looking up and you're trying to notice the birds. If you live in a northern climate, obviously a lot of birds leave for the winter, but then they start coming back, especially around this time of year. So, do you see any of those birds? Do you see that they've returned? Even better idea is if you want to encourage the birds to come into your space, if you do have a lawn or a balcony, putting out a bird feeder and really taking the time to notice which birds arrive and what types they are. You can look it up online. There are so many great guides that can teach you a little bit about your local birds, and connecting with just that tiny bit of wildlife I find to be very refreshing at this time of year. Let's see, what else do you guys have to say? Priya in the comments says that the initial flower in the British Columbian coast is winter jasmine. That's a beautiful flower. Let's see. And I see several of you guys mentioning dandelions as the first flower to pop up in spring. I love a good dandelion, even though many consider them weeds. Let's see. Edward Tone in the comments says that seeing buds on the trees in my neighborhood, yeah, that can be a great early spring indicator as well. And then Willow Farmer in the comments says, longer and brighter days. Love the energy I get from the sun. Yes, another thing you're going to really start to notice if you live in a northern climate at this time of year is the longer days. Now, it does get a bit tricky because of the whole daylight savings time thing. Recently, we just spring forwarded, right? So the days might appear a little bit shorter than they were right before daylight savings time. But I think in general, people, we can all notice that the days are continuing to get longer, and they will continue to do so until we hit that point of the summer solstice or Litha. So let's see, what else do we have? Another thing you can do at this time of year for Ostara is to do some spring cleaning. Yes, spring cleaning is something that isn't necessarily religious or spiritual, but it kind of is too in a certain way. When you really connect with the idea of what we're doing, we're clearing out the old to make space for the new, for this new spring season. And it can be a really magical process too, depending on how you go about your spring cleaning. I actually did a pagan happy hour episode on magical cleaning a few weeks ago, shortly after I moved into this home, where I talked about how to use magical herbs in your cleaning supplies, or how to make your own cleaning materials and liquids and things like that. So if you're interested in that, check out my previous pagan happy hour all about magical ways to clean your home. But both the physical and the magical cleaning can be the same thing. It can be something simple like putting a few drops of Florida water in your mop bucket, or a certain herb, for example. So you're both energetically cleaning the space and physically cleaning the space. Speaking of cleaning, just one fun thing I'm going to be doing soon, in a few months, I'm going to be going to the John C. Campbell Folk School in North Carolina. I don't know if any of you in the comments are familiar with it, but they teach kind of old world crafts and skills. And I'm going to be learning besom making or broom making in the ancient Scottish tradition. So hopefully I'll be getting some great knowledge there, and I'll be making my own brooms that I'll be able to use for my spring cleaning and just my cleaning in general. So lots of exciting things around cleaning, which is often a not very exciting task, if I'm honest. But when you approach it from like kind of a spiritual perspective, like we are entering that spring season, I'm going to put some nice herbs in here. I'm going to energetically cleanse the space along with physically cleansing the space. It can make it a little bit more fun. Now, the next thing I wanted to mention as an idea is something new to me, actually. This is a type of divination that involves eggs. Now, it's called Ovumancy or Ovumancy. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Oomancy if you want to look it up online. And what this is basically divination through eggs. So what you do is you take an egg, you crack it, you separate the yolk and the white. You leave the yolk to the side. You can maybe eat that later if you want. And you boil a pot of water. And once the water is boiling, you pour the egg whites into the water. And as the egg whites are cooking and forming, they're going to create a different type of shape or shapes. And that's where the divination occurs. So you're trying to kind of notice the shapes that the egg whites make as they cook. In a way, this is similar to tea leaf reading. In tea leaf reading, after you have the loose leaf tea in the cup, after you finish the tea, you're looking at the pattern or the shapes that the tea, leftover tea makes. Same thing here, where you are looking at the shapes and trying to divine what those shapes might represent for your future. Now, I do believe this is a pretty old folkloric practice, which is awesome. I love that. Now, there probably aren't any books that are going to tell you what shapes mean certain things. So you're really going to have to use your intuition here. Though I would say that you could purchase a book about tea leaf reading and understand the shapes and symbols from that, and then use that same guide in your egg divination. So that could just be a fun thing to try out if you're interested in different types of divination. I know a lot of you all are interested in learning about kind of the different types, and you know, we have runes and tarot being the most common, but there are so many other interesting ways to divine the future. So I recommend giving it a try. Maybe it'll tell you something interesting, and you know, it's pretty cheap, pretty easy to try out. So let me see here. Okay. Oh, I have a super chat here that I'm just now getting to. Sorry about that. From Tiffany. Thank you so much, Tiffany. That says, my girls and I have started our herb garden and have really enjoyed getting ready for spring. And we've also planted a new tree. Awesome, Tiffany. Thank you so much. I'm sorry it took me a little while to get to your super chat. I am just like you. I just got a lemon tree and I am about to plant it. I am so excited. I love gardening. I'm a huge fan. So thank you again so much for the super chat. Oh, we have an interesting question here that says, since it's Ostara season, have you heard of a Genus Loci? I found the term online and I'm not sure what it means exactly. So, great question. A Genus Loci is a spirit associated with a particular area. So, looking at where you live and really digging deep and It could be a spirit associated with a plant or a tree that is native to where you live. It could be a lake, river, could be a ancient spirit associated with a indigenous population where you live. Everywhere has their own kind of genus loci. So this is something you can really work with in your own practice. Back when I lived in Chicago, one of the main genus loci I worked with was Lake Michigan, as Chicago is on Lake Michigan. And this powerful, amazing lake, I felt had this spirit. It had this spiritual energy. So I worked with the genus loci, or the spirit of Lake Michigan. Now, here in Savannah, I'm still getting accustomed to it. It's something that happens over time where you start to kind of feel into the energies of your local environment. What we have here in Savannah is a tree. It's a type of tree called the southern live oak. If you've ever seen those trees covered in Spanish moss, it's the southern live oak tree, and they are everywhere in the city, including all around my home. So I think these trees kind of have their own genus loci, or their own kind of spiritual essence or energy. And if you want, you can give offerings to the genus loci. So yeah, that's a great question. Oh, and a super chat here from Jakara that says, "Happy Ostara. There is some beautiful spring energy about you today. Thanks for sharing it with us." Well, I'm glad you are enjoying it, and thank you so much for joining me today. So a couple other ideas. We have a few minutes left here in our pagan happy hour. Another fun thing you can do with an egg for Ostara is a little sigil magic. Now, sigil magic is something that I really enjoy. I've done quite a few videos about sigils and how to create your own sigil. So if you're not very familiar with sigil work and sigil magic, I recommend after this going on my channel to the search bar and just type in sigil, and you'll find some good videos there. But you can draw sigils on pretty much any surface, right? So I really like the idea of drawing a sigil on an egg. So on the shell of an egg, you can, of course, first write out what your intention is in a sentence. Now, there are different ways to do this. How I usually do it is I cross out the vowels and the repeated letters to create maybe there's like 4 or 5 letters left after that point. This is where you really try and let your mind go blank, trust your intuitive self. You look at those letters and you draw an image using those letters. And that's going to be your sigil. So you're drawing this on the egg. And maybe it is a hard-boiled egg, for example. So you're drawing it on the egg. And then how do you activate the sigil? There's lots of ways to activate a sigil. One of the more common ones is burning it, but you don't really want to do that if you drew it on an egg, right? So in this case, what I like to do is after I've drawn the sigil, I activate it by eating the egg. So say it's on a hard-boiled egg. I then break the shell, get the shell off, and I eat the egg. I am ingesting that intention in order to activate it. Or if it's not a hard-boiled egg, you can crack it and fry it and eat it, right? So the idea of eating that sigil, internalizing that message so that it becomes part of you. And then with sigil work, you really try to, after you've activated the sigil, to kind of not think about it, just let it be. And hopefully what your intention was in the creation of that sigil will occur. Let's see. We have a few more super chats. Let's see. We have a super chat from Leonard James that says, cheers. Thank you for joining me. Let's see. From Michelle, we have a super chat that mentions books for parents wanting to celebrate pagan holidays with kids. She mentioned Circle Round by Starhawk. And books by Mary Summer Rain. Circle Round was a book that my mom had and I leafed through growing up. It's been a really beneficial book. And there are more and more books coming out that help pagan parents teach the pagan ways to their kids, or help their kids connect with paganism, which I think is wonderful. Let's see. Maria Welch has a super chat. She says, first time catching happy hour live. I appreciate all the info you bring in. Thank you so much, Maria. I'm glad you're enjoying the show today. And cheers. um, so let's see. Oh, the last idea I had that I wanted to share with you guys today for Ostara, though of course there are many more ideas out there. I recommend taking a search online after this. But I am a big fan of doing seasonal eating and seasonal feasts for the different holidays. So looking at Ostara and the Equinox, what is growing where you live? Now, it might be a bit difficult for many of you Northerners watching, because you're probably still in, maybe you got some kale, maybe you got some cabbage. In the South, we have probably a little bit more going on in the garden so far. But I really like to create seasonal feasts based on the holiday. So, really looking at what is local to where you live, what is seasonal to where you live in terms of vegetables, and then cooking it. So I love doing kind of different dinner parties. So sometimes I even invite people over for the different Sabbats and have a nice little dinner party or potluck where we all make a spring dish. But it can be a great way to connect with others in your area. Of course, eating seasonally isn't technically like pagan or religious, but as pagans, we can kind of view it through that lens and appreciate it from the multiple viewpoints you can have towards something so simple as cooking a seasonal dinner. So I highly recommend thinking about what you're going to be eating on Ostara and maybe planning something spring-like and something really fun. So we have a couple minutes left. Let me know if you have any fellow ideas, suggestions, thoughts that you want to share about Ostara season and the spring equinox. I'll be bringing your thoughts. If you have any suggestions for future pagan happy hours, of course, let me know. And, I'm always here for you guys. I want to make sure that I am creating content that you enjoy and find valuable. Let's see, checking your comments now. Let's see. Oh, a comment that says, thank you for the information on Genus Loci and that I wish everyone a beautiful Ostara. Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed that. Maybe we need to do a whole separate pagan happy hour all about the Genus Loci. That could be interesting. Lee in the comments says, up north, cooking with maple syrup is seasonal with a sacred meaning. And she has a question. Can you draw sigils on eggs for baking? Yeah, I think you definitely could. If you draw the sigil on the egg and then you crack it open and use it for a recipe, the whole point is you're ingesting that sigil, right? So you're bringing it into your body. Let's see. Interesting idea. For a future pagan happy hour, the topic of science and paganism, which is something I'm really interested in. I really recommend the book Real Magic by Dean Radin, which takes a scientific and lab approach towards magic. It's a good one to check out. Okay, let's see. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining me for Pagan Happy Hour today. I really want to wish you all a beautiful Ostara and Equinox. Feel free to keep commenting and connecting with each other on ways to celebrate the spring season, to celebrate this pagan holiday. And I will, of course, see you next week. Talk to you later. Bye.